All right, we're back. Back for number 5. Okay, it's been the 5th week since we
Yeah, man.
began this podcast. Things are getting looking very well. I do appreciate for all you guys, for all the new comments and the views. And glad you guys are finding value in this season of Lifting Nerds. We really, really appreciate it. Now, in this today, we are going to talk about a very common thing a lot of our clients are struggling with, especially for myself. It's a lot of the female clients that struggle with these matters, and I'm sure everybody wants to know on things that we want to talk about here is how to actually deal with hunger levels in 2 specific stages of our fitness journey. Now, before we get into that, what triggers hunger and things like that, and there are differences between if you're actually hungry or is it a false signal or something like that. So what are the actual differences in what is like hunger levels and things like that?
Yeah. Yeah, so I like to categorize it as 3 different things. So like the first thing is going to be like cravings. The second thing is hunger, and the third thing is food focus. So cravings is usually when you just are specifically focus on having something based on its texture, based on its flavor, based on like the specific food item, if you're feeling like you're restricting yourself from it. So that's going to be more so like a craving. Hunger itself is going to be like a specific symptom that your body is doing in terms of wanting to get more food in. So if your stomach is like growling, if you're feeling like dizziness from like low blood sugar levels and stuff like that, that's a sign that your body is hungry. There's also what we would call like food focus. This kind of ties into hunger quite well, but a lot of people with food focus, it's more so just a lot of thoughts on food, and especially like for me right now and deep into competition prep, the food focus is quite high. So like when I see food, my freaking eyes like freaking light up. So like, and like my thoughts are more so around food rather than other things I used to think about a bit more. So you're just constantly thinking about food a bit more. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're extremely hungry. It's just our body is like, hey, like we need to focus on this more, just because our body fat levels aren't at a good spot. But that's another thing I wanted to kind of go in with this podcast, is just talk about the different hormones that are going to influence our appetite. So ghrelin is probably one of the big, like most well-known hormones in terms of increasing our appetite. And then the second one is going to be leptin. Leptin is linked to like a body fat cell size. So if our body fat cells shrink, our leptin is actually going to decrease. So leptin itself is an appetite suppressant. So when your fat cells shrink, you're actually going to become more hungry. When your fat cells gain in size, then you are going to get less hungry. So that's how it's kind of affected with that specific hunger hormone.
I
There's
actually have a
also this
question. Yeah,
other.
sorry. I'm just
Yeah.
gonna cut you off. I just have a question there for you. So you said that when your fat cell size increase, it'll actually decrease appetite.
Yeah.
And then when your fat cells shrink, you will increase your appetite.
That's
Okay.
correct.
So the other side of it is, I think there might be questions for audiences out there. So when you increase your fat cells and sorry, my bad. Yeah, when your fat cells increase, then you feel less hungry. Would that reflect on somebody's externally?
Yes. So if you are less hungry, you're probably just not going to be consuming as many calories, which is going to result in you over time reducing your total body weight or your total body fat. Same thing with the other way around. So if your body fat cells are getting smaller and smaller and smaller, typically we don't actually gain new body fat cells. Typically, it's just a change in size of them. There, I believe, is some minor research showing if you overfeed in excess, say, for example, after like a bodybuilding show or after like starving yourself for a while, then you can actually gain new body fat cells. But for the most part, you're just going to be increasing the size or decreasing the size of them. And that one, it kind of comes down to like there's another theory when it comes to body fat cells, like the body fat set point theory. So naturally, our bodies tend to want to sit in a certain range. This range is typically like plus or minus like 10 pounds or so. So when we are figuring this out, or when we get below this body fat set point range, this is going to cause our appetite to want to go up because our body naturally wants to go back into this set point again. If we're going the opposite way, where we're going outside or above this set point, this is going to cause our appetite to decrease and try to bring us back to this set point. So for people, typically when we're doing a fat loss phase, we don't want to go extremely under that body fat set point, or else that can create quite a large amount of hunger. So yeah, we do want to take that into consideration when we're doing competition preps, when we're doing basic fat loss phases.
All right, that's awesome. That's really, really well explained. But I think there is a one question out there is, I'm not sure if you got this question before. How do we define an individual's body fat set point?
Yeah, so it's going to be very individual to them. Some people will naturally be a little bit higher in their natural body fat set point. So some people may naturally sit between 15 to 20%. Some people may naturally just be a little bit leaner and sit between 10 to 15. Some people may be like 20 to 25. So it's just going to be based off of their hunger hormones, like they feel comfortable, where they feel satisfied after consuming their meals is where they're going to be probably naturally sitting. A lot of people, when they do like an extreme fat loss journey where they lose like 50, 60 or so pounds, especially if they do it too rapid, their body will tend to rebound up to its kind of natural set point, or they might even overshoot. I've seen that a lot after competition prep, but we'll get into that a little bit later on. So yeah, like it's gonna depend on each individual, depend on their lifestyle, to how active they naturally are, the food composition that they're having. If they're naturally eating more kind of whole foods, they're going to be naturally just consuming a little bit less calories and be able to sit on like that lower end of their body fat range. For example, for me, my body fat percent range, or my weight kind of range, where I naturally want to sit at, is between like 185 pounds and 195 pounds. Once I go above 195 pounds, my body really resists it. And my appetite goes way down, and I have to almost like force feed to continue gaining weight. When I go under like that 185, 180 mark, that's where my hunger hormones start to ramp up, and I can find myself wanting to eat more. So that's like me personally. I don't know for you if you have a natural range or body weight range that like you can sit in super comfortably.
Yeah, I do. So this is so right now I'm sitting at a body weight of about 66, 67 kilos. So that's about 145 pounds. I'm not quite at the 150 pounds yet. I've never been at a 150 pound my whole life. So I've just been sitting at I used to be a really light kid. So I used to be sitting at 125 to 140 pounds. That was my range. My heaviest was a 140 pound and was like kind of a little bit more chubbier, but I've always been a skinny guy. And so right now in this off season, I kind of have to do where you have to force feed yourself a little bit. And then that's, when me and Brian are like really trying to work together on that. But speaking of which, well, you're on competition prep. I think I would really want to pop the question here is, as bodybuilding competitors, after their show, I don't know. As for me, I can't speak for a lot of people, because after my post show in October, I didn't really have a hunger spike. And I know there's many, like even almost 95% of all bodybuilders post show is a free meal. Like it's a must have free meal. So these hunger levels, why does it spike?
So the reason that it spiked up so much is I would say the main thing too is with competition prep, when we're going towards a show, like we have an end goal in mind, and like we can kind of ignore some of like the natural signaling to kind of get to that goal. But once you've already competed, once you've did your placing and everything, and you don't really have a goal after, you can start to really feel the effects of those hunger hormones. Um, but yeah, like I mentioned, like with that body fat set point theory, like for me, I'll just use myself as an example just because I find it just easy to explain that way. But like for me, I'm gonna be at about 170 probably on stage for my body weight. And again, I naturally want to sit around 185, 195. So my hunger hormones are pretty much super amplified just because my body fat levels are so low. So you're since those levels are so amped up, it's gonna make you want to consume more food than you probably should be. So that's where a lot of people end up going on full on binge episodes for multiple months after their show and end up gaining 30, 40 pounds sometimes within like a month or even 2 months. So it can be a little bit scary for some individuals after the competition prep, especially if they've done a very, very aggressive cut into their show. Like for yourself, you guys did things super gradual. I'm assuming that's probably kept everything in check in terms of your hunger hormones a little bit more. But if you go too aggressive with it, that's where like hunger can go quite extreme and fatigue can be quite extreme. So that can create these kind of rebounds. So there's so many things that can affect our hunger or appetite, like stress, like especially when you're at these low body fat percentages. If your stress is super high, that's going to make you want to eat more. So if you can manage that, that can reduce the urge to eat. But there's also a bunch of different things that we can do to help reduce these symptoms. But yeah, the biggest thing is it's just your hunger hormones are just super amplified at that point. And since you don't have an end goal anymore, your willpower isn't going to be quite the same. So that's where a lot of times with people, you'll see them just go crazy overboard with the food. So it's good to have a game plan for that. I like to use the approach of like the team 3DMJ, like the kind of recovery diet.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to get into that right now or if we should wait on that.
We should wait on it. If you did, if you guys have not seen the recovery diet, come join the team through the MJ.
Yeah.
We're not paid sponsors, but yeah, that it's a really, I think it's a, I'm also looked into the recovery diet. I really agree with what they're preaching there. And I think Brian actually took a very similar approach for me as well. So that's the thing where I wanted to ask is it leads to this other question that I have, as a recovery diet. The main goal of the recovery diet, generally speaking, is we want to recover our natural set point back to its, body fat set point theory, right? So we're just reaching where our body feels the most comfortable, most natural at that body weight. And that's the kind of generalizing the idea of recovery diet is we want to reach that goal back into that natural set point as fast as possible. Now, as you also did say, there are, overfeedings and binge eating habits that might come post show. So we all know that there are like different body types, as there are people who are more endomorphs, and there are also people like me, which is a little bit more skinnier. What usually happens if for endomorphs, so people who actually pack on a little bit more body fat easier, um, in terms of recovery diet, would they overshoot, or what would happen there?
Yeah, since with the endomorphs, since they naturally like to sit at a higher body fat percentage, when they go to these extreme lows in terms of body fat, their hunger compared to somebody else that just naturally sits leaner is going to be more extreme. So that's where typically, like after the show is done, they typically have higher levels of hunger. And like a lot of times it can be very difficult to slowly pack on the weight when your hunger levels are so extreme. So yeah, for individuals like that, it can make the recovery or the post show a lot more challenging. But again, if you can do everything right and go down nice and slow and controlled, and ensure that you aren't freaking just crash dieting into the show. You can manage things better that way in terms of your hunger hormones, your testosterone levels, just through your overall like stress and fatigue. And that can help you kind of slowly come out of it. But yeah, it's going to be harder for an individual that naturally sits at a higher body fat point.
So would you preach using the recovery diet on endomorphs?
I would still do it that way because like there's like the other thing called like the reverse diet where you slowly bring up your calories. You can do it two different ways, like slowly bring it up from that deficit point to maintenance and then go past maintenance, or you can go right to maintenance and then slowly increase your calories week to week. I've found for most people, especially if it's their first show, it's you just don't have the willpower to like or capacity to like handle it. And a lot of times, like if you slowly creep up your calories, you're not really creeping up your body fat that fast. So you just feel like shit for even longer. And like in order to continue like actually making progress, we want to get to a point where your hormones and everything are in a good spot to continue making progress, continue growing muscle. So if you're constantly just slowly coming out of that, you're just kind of losing time in terms of making progress in your off season. So I do believe they should still gain about 10% of their body weight back, which is, yeah, again, probably going to be majority from fat mass, and then start to slow things down over time. Because yeah, if you try to slowly come up, I would say majority of people fail when they try to take that approach, just because it's so challenging. They don't have like a goal in mind super close. And then their motivation is super low and their willpower is super low. So it's just not a great way of going about it. And it's just also another set of restriction. So the more restriction you have, the more stress you're going to have, the higher your hunger is going to be. So if you can reduce the restriction, then that's going to also reduce the stress and reduce your appetite.
Great. I mean, so speaking of restrictions, so let's look at the other end of the spectrum. We were talking about endomorphs where we have a little bit less, we need to have more control on how we consume. So the other spectrum is for, skinny people, post-show or for skinny individuals, what are some of the struggles that maybe skinny people will have coming out of a post bodybuilding show?
So skinny people, it's more so going to be like you'll be able to recover a lot faster. Like your hormones and everything will get back to a good spot within maybe a week or two after your show. But then it gets challenging because you have to start ramping your calories up, and your hunger hormones start to get suppressed as you start getting closer to that top range of your body fat set point. So yeah, it's a completely different struggle. Just because your body naturally stops thinking about food as much. You naturally just feel more full and just don't ever really feel like eating. So you have to push those calories up, and that can get quite uncomfortable for a lot of people. So yeah, for those individuals, definitely having more calorie dense foods and having like a little bit of cheesecake or having some good stuff in there is going to help you get those calories up over time, not just having just strictly whole foods. But yeah, I would say that's probably like the biggest struggle for individuals that are naturally on the skinnier or the lower body fat side.
I totally agree with that because everything you just said is everything I struggle with post show since until now. But here's the other part now. Lau, what are some of the protocols that you would probably recommend to maybe your athletes on how to deal with elevated hunger levels? So two-part question. So this is the main question the first part is going for bodybuilding competitors. And the second part of it is for general population where they're just going through a fat loss phase. So how would you like run these
Okay.
protocols? Yeah.
Yeah, so for bodybuilders, no matter what, you are going to deal with high amounts of hunger. You are going to deal with feeling hungrier after eating your meals, and deal with like irritability and all this kind of stuff that comes along with being in a low body fat percentage, and just being able to accept that you are going to feel this way, and no amount of food, no matter how much high volume food, is going to stop you from feeling hungry or being focused around food. Understanding that is very, very important for bodybuilding people, since you're getting to extremely low unhealthy levels of body fat percentages. So understanding that, but you can still make it so that you can reduce the hunger a little bit with bodybuilding prep by having more kind of high volume foods that have less calories in them. So making sure that you're eating smart, like having at least a serving of fruit or vegetables in each of your meals, which is going to give you a high amount of fiber, a good amount of volume. The micronutrients is also going to be very beneficial, but that's going to be very, very good. Same thing with protein. Protein, for the most part, is, I would guess, would be one of the most satiating macronutrients. I know there's some research in supporting that some of carbohydrate sources can be quite satiating. Like there's a big satiating scale, but most protein sources, especially when it comes to whole food sources, are going to be a bit more satiating. So making sure that you're getting a good amount of protein, which is also going to help with muscle retention. A big one too for being in competition prep, since your hunger levels are quite high and food focus is quite high, if you want to watch out for having too many palatable foods. So anything that's super salty, super sugary, anything that wants you to eat a lot more of it after you consume it is probably not going to be a good thing, especially deep into prep. Like I've noticed, especially with my last competition prep, if I had like granola bars or like any like candy or anything, it would just ramp my hunger up to the extreme. So eating a little bit more bland definitely helps just kind of manage the hunger a bit more. So I think those are kind of quite large on the scale of like what's going to help with prep. Having a bit more water and stuff like that too can go quite a ways, and because sometimes we can just be slightly dehydrated, and having a bit more water can kind of fill up some of the space in our stomach. But yeah, I would say those are kind of the main ones for like an actual bodybuilding prep person. When it comes to just the general like fat
Just the fat
loss
loss.
like phase, yeah, for those individuals, again, hunger should never get like super extreme for you. If you're getting like extreme symptoms of hunger from a general fat loss phase, you're probably taking it too extreme. You probably have a too large of a calorie deficit, or you're just making really shitty food choices, and just eating like a lot of fast food, eating like super calorie dense, like bars and stuff like that, no veggies at all. Like, yeah, then you're probably going to get quite a bit of hunger. But if you have like a very minor deficit, where you're losing about a pound or two per week, eating a good like 80% of your food coming from whole foods, 20% a little bit of junk food to get rid of those cravings, that is going to really help you manage your hunger. There's other little tiny tricks that you can do with hunger. So if you have like a smaller plate, you can put your food and stuff on a smaller plate and it can look like more food. So it can like kind of trick your mind into thinking you're eating more. You can do the complete opposite. If you have a hard time getting in food, have like a freaking gigantic plate and put food on there, and then it looks like you're not eating as much food. So you can do little things like that to help like trick your mind a little bit. But yeah, I always like to use the scale 1 to 10 in terms of rating hunger for all my clients. So 10 is where you just can't stop thinking about food, just like you're having a hard time falling asleep because of food, because you're like hungry before bed, and like you're getting hungrier after meals. Like that would be like a 10 out of 10 hunger. One would be like you're completely stuffed, you can't get like any more food in. That would be like a 1. For most of my fat loss clients, they're typically between like a 5 to like 7 when they're in like a basic fat loss phase. For my competition prep clients, they're going to be towards the end of it, probably get to like the 9 or possibly even 10 for a couple of days where like their hunger gets quite extreme. But yeah, there's so many different things that can influence our hunger. So looking at training volumes, like, are you just training too much? Are you stressing your body too much? Are you, yeah, not having good quality like food items? And all that can, yeah, have a great influence on your appetite.
I totally agree, because I remember we talked about a similar topic back in season 1. I think it was Christmas or Thanksgiving, that we like how to like go through the holidays, and then these are similar methods that we use on putting all your food on a one plate. It's just to trick your mind that you're actually eating that type of portion, and then we stop there. I think that's one of the strategies that we promoted back in season 1 where we talked about that. So that is still valid. if you're just a general, just a general fat loss phase. But I think you're really, really right about competition prep is going to be a much stricter circle that we have to follow, since, we are doing a sport, and then, there are sacrifices that we have to make. I mean that, we do what we do, but I think you pointed out very, very good points that, we have to, intake a, higher volume of protein. So your total calorie is here, and probably like a third of it, or maybe even 40% of that total caloric intake is probably protein. Less palatable food, I think, is a very, very good point that you make. It is something that is very, very dangerous if we do this post show, or even yeah, during a fat loss phase. I think very palatable food is very, very dangerous, because that's going to be the thing that's going to trigger you. More water, I think, is going to be very, very useful, which I think also something else that Brian actually mentioned is make it yourself some liquid foods like a protein shake, things like that. I think that could also be filling as well, just to stuff yourself and then also fill yourself with water and all that stuff. I think you make some really, really good point outs there for reducing, hunger levels. But let's say, Mr. Beastful, shout out to you, man, your homie there. So let's say, for my final question is, so what if for like natural bodybuilders, what would your protocol be, just right after the show and a week post show?
Yeah, so right after the show, like I like to give somebody at least, yeah, free meal, or possibly even like a free day after too, and give them just like have 3 meals. Make sure you're not just eating the whole day, but have like three like good size meals. Have whatever you want on that one day, and then kind of get back into the groove of it that next day. But I usually like to increase that calorie surplus, so that they're in a surplus of gaining about 1.5 pounds per week. So it's quite an aggressive surplus. But just to get them back into a body fat zone where they're going to be within their body fat set point and starting to feel normal, starting to not be driving down the road and be looking at every single restaurant as you go by, or not be like so focused on your food when you're eating that you can't even have a good conversation with like your partner or something like that. So trying to get back to normal as soon as possible without going extreme, like without binging on food every single day. Because I've definitely had experiences myself in the past where I've literally had like 10,000 calories like 3 or 4 days in a row. And like just from like hunger being so high and like stress level at that point in my life was quite extreme. So I think there's a combination of factors that just made me go overboard there. But having an approach where it's not too restrictive too. I typically get people, if they're tracking macros in their prep, to go just to calories and protein, and just to loosely track it, to try to keep as much restriction away as possible, because I find that's a huge relief, and an easy way to kind of get to feeling normal. Because with competition prep, when you're trying to get within your macros, um, getting deeper and deeper and closer to your show, the sense of restriction does start to get higher. And that sense of restriction sometimes can almost make our hunger higher. And I've seen a lot of people post show, if we try to make things too restrictive, they end up just going into the fuck it mode. Whereas if we have a general guideline on, okay, let's try to aim for this range of calories, try to still get a good amount of protein, let's still get your training session in, it typically goes a lot smoother that way, rather than if I'm like, okay, let's get within like 10 grams of each macronutrient, let's really slowly bring your weight back up. That usually never really goes well in terms of the adherence. So having a bit more looseness definitely tends to work better with people coming off of a competition prep.
That's absolutely awesome. So just to generalize and really sum up here, I think we provided, Brandon, you provided a lot of good strategies and a lot of expectations for people how to manage hunger level. First of all, so we've got most of the general population. I would also say majority of the population would probably struggle with just controlling the portions and controlling the caloric intake post or even during a fat loss phase, and how to suppress their hunger. But on the other side, we also spoke for people like myself. We're naturally skinny, and there's just a little bit more leeway there on how we could approach this. And I think, speaking of how to do a surplus, I think the skinny people would actually have a lot more to gain from that. But that's probably another rabbit hole we could actually dig into. But this is, I think, a lot of people struggle with more with the hunger levels on how to control them. So we just want to repeat those things. It's going to be, either higher volume food, so higher fiber food, so a little bit more satiating, higher protein, less palatable food is going to be definitely my favorite one out of all of them, in consuming more water. And then, so these are the couple of the main things. And also your strategy of putting things on a smaller plate. I think that's a really, really good one to like just trick your mind. But all in all, I think it's really good set point to you leave it there. Is there anything else that you want to remind us that what we need to do in terms of this hunger level stuff?
I would just say too, like another quick trick that you can do is just slow down your eating. That's another thing I find with myself in prep. Like I sometimes go way too fast. I'm like, oh shit, like I finished that plate in like I'm not even like 30 seconds. So being able to slow down your eating so that once you finish that meal, like you can actually start getting those hunger signals to start feeling the sensation of full. Cause like, yeah, if you're deep in the prep and your hunger is really high, you're going to tend to want to eat quicker. But if you can slow it down, even have smaller utensils. I've been using a tiny baby spoon for my yogurt just so I eat a little bit slower. So little things like that can definitely go a long way.
All right, that's awesome. So we know you're just 30 seconds. But, I mean, I think that's a really good point, because why I want to say it's a really good point, because I have a couple clients who are in the Asian culture, and usually with Asian cuisine, you just have all the foods out in the front, and then you just eat and eat and eat, and that's also the things that eating too quickly is, it's going to result for you be overfeeding in that particular meal. And then especially like things like foods like hot pot, man, like everything comes, you just put it in the pot and they just like take it out and they just jam it in. By the time you know it, it's already too late, because your food is ready like all the way up to your neck. So I think, chewing slowly, eating slowly is really, really good strategy. I think one of the main bigger strategies of, because it actually will tire you out, your jaw and all that stuff, and then you just don't want to eat it. I think that's a really, really good thing that you added in there. Besides that, anything else that you wanted to like add up?
No, yeah, I would just say like when you are doing like if you're just somebody that's wanting to lose a little bit of body fat for the summer or just for your general health, like you should never have very extreme levels of hunger. Like you may have a couple hours of the day where your hunger is a little bit higher, where you want to eat more food. But if you find like you're like full on wanting to like binge out on food, that's probably a sign that you're not dieting properly. So that's something that you definitely want to look at. And then when it comes to competition prep, yeah, just understanding that you are going to get hunger, and using some of these strategies to help manage it can definitely help a decent amount, but it's not going to completely take your hunger away.
That's great. So I think that's, yeah, pretty much all we got for you, man. Really, really appreciate all the information to put out. I hope it really helps you guys too. But we've got really exciting stuff coming up. So we really hope you guys to stay tuned for our next episode as well. We'll see you guys next week.